Hey everyone, today we're just going to quickly go through some small tweaks that I'm considering for my hybrid dash variant. This is mostly going to be also cross-referencing with the more recent dash lists that have actually put up tournament results. So we're going to be looking at a few of those today, and then kind of in real time making a few adjustments based on like what we're seeing from the new list and what seems to be working out. So starting here, we have my current hybrid list that initially had some changes that I made preemptively. The main cuts were removing payload and yellow throttle from the deck in favor of BIOS update and pulse wave harpoon. The main reason why was because I think that it's probably incorrect to be cutting boost cards for BIOS update. You need a pretty tight ratio of boost cards in your deck, especially if you're gonna be running effects like high octane or maximum velocity. These are cards that need boost and it's part of the synergy, especially also if you're gonna be running, for instance, cards like Hanabi Blaster. If you're interested in that card, you need a tight ratio of cards that can actually boost in your hand. In my opinion, I think BIOS update should be cut for another non-boost card, and in my current list that was payload. And pulse wave harpoon is being slotted in for yellow throttle. Yellow throttle is just a 2 for 5 with boost with no real other upside, and pulse wave harpoon is a 1 for 4, which is cheaper, although 1 point less damage, but more significantly has this insane text box on here. The main reason for cutting the throttle, 2 costs are nice in dash, but they are pretty expensive. I don't think the one attack on the throttle is really making or breaking the card. I think that you can probably cut it for pulse wave harpoon. Those are my first iterations. I cut down some blues in favor of 2 extra Tekla pounders because we were on BIOS update, and it's pretty much the same. The old high octane list with Tekla plasma pistol, it's the same deal here, cutting payload and cutting yellow throttle. The combo version of dash, I believe I left exactly the same. I'm not exactly sure what would change here. You would probably just cut maybe potentially payload for the pulse wave harpoon, just because having another one cost boost in the deck will enable your maximum velocity and your overblast a lot more, and payload was pretty good late game evasive damage, but wasn't ultimately that important in my opinion. You were able to win games pretty consistently with it, but I don't think it was like really a make or break card. I think you're probably fine without it in the current meta. But let's jump into a few lists here. So the first one we'll look at, this is what got third at the Battle Hardened in Hong Kong. Let's make a note that this is Blitz, so this is not CC. We're gonna get a couple ideas here. So what do we see popping up in these Blitz lists? So we have both the third place and the first place here. Cross comparing these, Hanabi Blaster in this list and no Hanabi Blaster here. These are both very aggressive. They're leaning probably on Talishar. I don't see Plasma Pistol or High Octane in either of these lists. That's pretty interesting. I think something else that was pretty notable to me was the omission of Maximum Velocity in both lists. I thought that was incredibly interesting, because these are very aggressive go face styles of dash. So I was very interested as to why there was no maximum velocity. If anyone knows, feel free to tell me. I think Scramble Pulse is a really powerful card that probably should be, I think, probably added to the Blitz list, especially if you're going to be running cards like T-Bone, and also just in Blitz, having a reduction to armor value, especially in a 20 health format, is really important. Most of Blitz, unfortunately, is really based around how much value you can get out of your armor. We often see that some of the best heroes in Blitz are also coincidentally heroes that have really good armor values. Of course, not all of them. Like Wizard would be the prime example of a class that doesn't have good armor but is incredibly strong in Blitz. But for the most part, armor means a lot in a 20 health format. If you're forced to not be blocking with a card, then you have a lot of options, especially in a format that small. The first person who has to start blocking the cards they don't want to block with usually loses, but if you have a really good armor suite, then you can kind of work around that. So Scramble Pulse, denying that's really good. We also see BIOS update come in. Makes a lot of sense considering that in a smaller deck, especially boosting a lot, there's a good chance you're going to see Core or Pounder off of the BIOS update if you play it early. It is interesting that both of these lists are still running yellow throttle. So my initial analysis of the deck may be incorrect in that sense. Maybe yellow throttle is still worth running. This list is running, both of these actually are running Overloop, which is an interesting card because that card has not really been played in a long time. Most people have been cutting it. normally for Combustible Courier, but we actually see in this list here it's running both. I do find it interesting because I don't really know exactly what the win con here is. Maybe it is just going wide enough, but this doesn't even run Hanabi Blaster. I don't actually really know what the overall payoff here is. We don't see high octane, we don't see maximum velocity, we don't see Hanabi Blaster, we don't even see normally the one I would expect to see would be Overblast, right? We see that in the first place list, but the fact there's not even an Overblast here I think is really interesting. I would maybe need to see some actual gameplay footage of this deck to really understand exactly what the win condition is besides just raw vanilla damage with Go again, but neither here nor there. So when we look over at this list, it's a little bit more, I think what I would expect the deck to look like. We're still seeing Overblast in the deck as a finisher, although we're not seeing maximum velocity, which is very interesting. We do see high speed impact in this list. We do not see it in here, which if I believe is still in most of my lists. So I think that we'll revisit this list later. I think I would settle in on these are my adjustments. I actually still do have Yellow Throttle in here. So this is what I'm currently on for high octane version. Usually playing a bunch of 0 costs and 1 costs, and then having a blue pitch, pain in a Foundry Heart, and then shooting your pistol anywhere between 3 to 5 times in a turn. And then you can even get an extra one with Achilles if you want. That's pretty much the deck here. I liked it because it felt a little bit more consistent than the more explosive variation, but more explosive variation may be more viable now. This was made a long time ago, so it used to be pretty difficult to fire off maximum velocity, but now it doesn't seem like that's the case. I think even now you probably could make an argument that you run Hanabi Blaster here, or you can just stick on Talishar. It seems like both these versions are pretty close to what this is, but the question is, would I make any adjustments? Well, we do see only 1 payload here, and we do see 2 here, which is very interesting. So maybe they are reliant on payload as more of a finisher, which is pretty interesting, I suppose. I'm not exactly sure why you would want payload over something like Overblast or maximum velocity. I think I would have a lot of trouble figuring out exactly why I would want to cut that card. However, I do think Scramble Pulse is really good, and I think I would just want to cut another 2 costs for it. Both these lists are still on Yellow Throttle, which is really interesting because I think you would rather just want Overblast, but you also don't have a whole lot of chain closers. I guess maybe if you're on Hanabi Blaster and Talishar, then maybe you do really need the boost into them. So maybe we can make a small adjustment here. So we'll put in Throttle. Throttle can go back in. And we can also put in Scramble Pulse. And have the blues changed at all? It seems like the blues are exactly the same. Nothing's really changed here. I don't really know exactly where I'm at with Overloop. I don't think I'm at a point where I want to put that card back in the deck. Neither of these lists are running Yellow T-Bone, which does make sense. You know how Scramble Pulse is another 1 for 4 with boost. But more importantly, it's just another 1 cost boost card, so it's now probably a little bit easier to fire off maximum velocity. But also these lists are not even on maximum velocity, so maybe we're starting to understand a little bit more that these lists are probably trying to do a bunch of damage, or in this case, put counters on Hanabi Blaster, and not even needing to rely on a certain cost curve to fire off maximum velocity. Maybe we're starting to uncover a little bit behind the philosophy of that deck. I think I still want maximum velocity. I still think it's a really powerful card. It feels a lot more easy to fire off than Overblast, at least in the sense that you can break the chain. Whereas if you do that with Overblast, if you're on the same curve for that turn, the problem is that the Overblast really gets nerfed, which is an issue. The way you sort of mitigate that is you play the first boost card, and then you close a chain, then to Foundry Heart, and then you play out your other 2 boost cards into the Overblast if that's like going to be a really significant problem. But at that point, you do lose a point of value off the Overblast, which is pretty unfortunate, I would say. But it does block for 3. I don't really see a reason to be having payload, I would say, unless if these decks are trying to beat Oldhim, but I don't really know if Oldhim is that winnable regardless, you know? So I could be wrong here, but I would be interested in cutting this and then seeing how this deck feels for now. And my assumption is that we also probably bring in Hanabi Blaster. I do think Hanabi Blaster can actually make the Oldhim matchup a little bit easier. So the question is, what do you cut here? I think you probably just cut Ironhide. But Ironhide was only here for Benji, and that doesn't really even exist. Honestly, we could just cut both of these, so you don't have to ask questions about why there's Ironhide in the deck. So what do we have here? We have our AB4, which is just overkill for Wizard. You really don't even need that, to be honest. You're still running Best. I'd be interested to see these lists are also on Best. This one is not. This is very interesting. This is just like super bare bones. Is there anything interesting here? Gambler's Gloves, I think is a good addition. I think if you want to deal with Rhinar or KO, this could both work. What is this version on? This version also runs Gambler's Gloves. It has Arcanite Skullcap, which is very interesting. Nolan Boots is was really bizarre. I don't know why those are in there. I don't really know what to make of battle hardened lists sometimes. You know, sometimes they are very local to the region, sometimes they are mainly just a local scene that's normally just dominated by the best players in the local region, and sometimes they're not really reflective of the overall meta or solved deck list, but they did put up results, so you know, we're not going to discount it. So I think I'm kind of comfortable with this. Are they also running Combustible Courier? This list was not. This list. Oh wait, no, sorry, we went too far. This list was. It is hard having so many 2 costs in the deck, but maybe we can just sit on this for a while. We'll sit on this for now. We'll test it a little bit. If anyone wants to run the deck and let me know, that'd be pretty helpful. So we're gonna stick with this for Blitz. So the question is, what do you cut for Pulse Wave Harpoon? And now I'm starting to consider cutting Overblast. I'm not entirely sure. I think we could try. Oh, this is hard. I think you could probably try cutting 1 Overblast. I don't think you need all 4 copies, although it is really nice to see in the first couple turns of the game. The question is, now we have to cut 1 other card. And I don't exactly know which card we're cutting. We are running 6 with 12. We're running 14 blues. And these lists are on 1. These lists are only on 12 blues, so I think we can probably actually just cut blues here, right? Does that seem like the answer? We have 6. Okay. Well, let's see. Wait, sorry, we jumped over to CC. Oh, this one's on 14 as well. And this one looks closer to what we're on. I think this is where the other list just simply cut maximum velocity, but I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I want to exactly do that. I do find it interesting that these lists are not running Magnetic Shockwave. Because I think with Scramble Pulse, I think you would want that. Although I guess having the cheap boost cards is nice for maximum velocity, but I don't know. All right, we won't go that far. I think Scramble Pulse is just good value on its own. We do have to cut 1 card. I think I would be interested in maybe just cutting the Overblast for now. We'll see if we need more in the deck, if it feels like there's a lack of finishers, but we'll call it good there. And now we've added our adjustments, so still mainly trying to lock in on maximum velocity, and then stacking a counter on Hanabi Blaster, or stacking a counter on Plasma Barrel Shot, having your crazy 20 to 25 damage turn, hopefully after arsenaling, and then winning the game from there. So call it there for now. Let's move on to the CC list. So we've already talked about the CC list changes, but let's go to some CC lists. So we have first and second from the Battle Hardened in Philadelphia. So let's look at the first place. Congratulations to Rose, if you're watching. So let's see, what do we have here? I think it is difficult. I think that the way that I sort of interpret like week 1 metas is that a lot of cards are not fully figured out yet. There's a lot of unsolved decks, unsolved aspects of the meta, not really understanding where some heroes fall into that, not knowing which heroes can now counter or have weaknesses to certain decks, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say is that the week 1 meta is like very loose. There's a lot of things that have not been figured out yet. There's a lot of things that can prey on week 1 metas. It's normally aggro decks, normally just because people haven't figured out new ratios, new numbers of cards to run. If they even should be running the new cards, decks can be a little bit underperforming, a little bit inefficient, and very efficient decks and very aggressive decks normally can prey on that very easily. But in Fab, it's a little bit different, but I still think that is true, where while people figure out, first of all, how to angle the meta, and then they have to learn what cards are even playable, if any heroes are now upgraded. So for instance, Azalea is not being talked about a little bit. We don't actually really know if she's like good enough yet, and you definitely wouldn't know that week 1, right? So an aggro deck like Dash makes sense, like totally sweeping some of the early events. I expect it to probably die down a little bit. I think this deck is pretty easy to hate out if people need to, but let's take a look. With that reference to week 1 metas is that I think some of these cards are not fully figured out yet. So we do see 1 copy of High Speed Impact, which is, I don't actually know if there's like a very deliberate reason, but I also see only 2 BIOS updates. So my assumption is that they were probably going back and forth on whether or not they wanted 3 BIOS update, or if they still needed that 1 cost boost attack. Then we also see Throttle here as well as just a 1 copy. We see 1 copy of Dissolution Sphere, so maybe that previously being a Throttle. We also see High Speed Impact and Magnetic Shockwave getting cut up as a 1 copy and then 2 copies. So There's a lot of interesting things. I think that mostly these are cards that are being shuffled around and not being fully solved yet, which is totally fine. But we will take that into consideration when like making any adjustments to this list. Nothing seems entirely out of the ordinary. The only thing that I think that deviates from my list is that they are running both BIOS update and payload, which is pretty interesting. We were considering just running one or the other, but this is a 2-and-2 split, so it does actually seem pretty close to what we're doing. We still see high octane here, but we also see maximum velocity, so it's pretty close to how my list typically runs. The question is whether or not you run both high octane and maximum velocity in the same list, or if this is just two separate gameplay variants, right? So you have high octane in your pistol plan and you have maximum velocity in your aggressive plan. But if they are only running pistol, my assumption is that it probably comes in for both matchups. Personally, I run both high octane and maximum velocity if I'm on the aggressive plan. As you look here is the 61 cards, so this is my traditional stock aggro list. The reason why is because both of these are 20 damage 5-card hands. If you can arsenal high octane and fire off and you have all 5 cards, you can probably do 20 damage. Same goes for maximum velocity, so why not have more access to 20 damage hands as an aggro deck? And at the end of the day, these both block 3, so it's not that bad. Let's go into our second place, which was notably a lot more aggressive. We see Hanabi Blaster here in addition to the pistol, so looks like this is still a hybrid list. Nothing's really deviating here from the norm. We still see D-Reacts, we see Sink Below. It's only 2 Sink Belows and 2 Unmovables, but 3 Plasma Purifiers and 2 Induction Chambers. Okay. Oh no, there are Fate Precincts. I was looking in the wrong spot. Notably, we do have Toma Fiendal. My assumption is that this is for the aggressive plan, especially because they're on Hanabi Blaster, probably trying to really reach the ceiling of the aggro turns. We see Powder Keg, which is interesting for sure. 2 Tekla Pounders, 2 Tekla Cores. Less than what I'm on, but are they using BIOS update? They are not. They're not using BIOS update, and they're only running 2 maximum velocities, which is pretty interesting. And they are on Yellow Throttle and Yellow T-Bone. Probably trying to always make sure they can have a counter on Hanabi Blaster. I still personally am not sold on the weapon. I am starting to understand a little bit why people find value in the weapon. Personally, it's still not there for me. I think that Dash is a vanilla aggro deck. And so what that means is that there's no on-hits that really multiply your damage outside of Combustible Courier. So the only one, right? So while other decks maybe run a little bit of underrate cards, normally the on-hits or the effects when stacked together are normally powerful enough that the overall value exceeds what it was originally. That doesn't always break down because Snatch is also above rate as a 0 for 4. The issue is that when you're only presenting vanilla damage, I think you really have to be careful with what your rates are, and I think you always have to be playing above rate or else you get outclassed by decks that maybe play cards that are on rate or maybe sometimes even lower but have really good compounding on hits and triggers and all this kind of stuff that basically accumulates more value than what your vanilla cards are doing. And the reason I say that is mainly to talk about the pistol, because the issue to me is that the pistol is 4 damage every 2 turns, right? You would load it, shoot it for 2, load it for shoot it for 2, whereas the Hanabi Blaster is 5 damage every 2 turns. But the biggest downside is that Hanabi Blaster limits the way that you can play your hand, right? So you cannot block normally with more than 1 to 2 cards, because most of the cards in this deck are going to be 1 cost and 2 cost. So unless if you're getting hands that are all T-bones or all 0 to 60s, the issue is that you always need 4 cards, right? You could have 3 0 to 60s and 1 zipper hit. Oh wait, no, sorry. You could have 1 zipper hit, 2 0 to 60s, and you would need another card to pitch, right? You would have to have the 1 resource of the zipper hit. The issue is if you block with a single card, you now no longer can present 3 cards that have boost, so you can't put a counter on your Hanabi Blaster. So in a deck that's literally entirely full of 3 blocks, we don't have any we only have the non-blocking items here, but everything in this deck blocks 3. Like, how many other decks are saturated with this good blocking potential? And then to have a weapon that says you cannot pivot basically and actually use another really important part of Dash's card pool. Dash's card pool is good for its raw vanilla damage with Go Again, but it's also very fantastic for its ability to block when needed. And the issue is that if you're running a weapon that basically limits your flexibility on the hero, I don't really want to be playing that weapon, right? Because even though you're getting 1 point more value every 2 turns, right, you're getting 5 damage instead of 4 damage, the limitation is really painful. As soon as you're forced to block, the weapon doesn't work anymore, right? Because like as soon as you have to block with 1 to 2 cards, you can't reliably put counters on it anymore. And getting 1 more point of value isn't enough to basically bolster the margins, right? So if you're familiar with playing Dash, you would know that a lot of your games really do come down to the wire, where you are blocking, loading your pistols, sending an attack back at your opponent, hopefully a break point, trying to eat as many cards as possible while staying alive yourself. So getting 1 more point of value every 2 turns isn't going to make it that you're not going to also be threatened with lethal at some point in the game, right? And as soon as you're threatened with lethal in the game, you no longer can use your weapon, which is really unfortunate. And I don't really like that. The upside to Hanabi Blaster is you can have really explosive turns, you can high roll really hard, you can also kind of prevent fatigue because now your weapon has pseudo dominate built in, which is really good. At least that's my opinion, right? I think you would probably want the pistol. In most cases, also enable stuff with high octane, which you cannot do with the Hanabi Blaster. And it just feels more consistent, right? Like late game, you can keep 2 card hands that have a blue, a 2 cost, or a 1 cost, and you can also load your pistol and fire it as well, and really grind out those last like few turns of the game in a way that you just can never do with Hanabi Blaster. And I don't think that the 1 extra point of damage every 2 turns is worth it, especially because that calculation slips so quickly as soon as you're forced to start blocking with cards, right? Like let's say your opponent has a power turn and they present a really important on hit that you're forced to block, or else you just like punt the game. And the issue is that once you block, now your Hanabi Blaster doesn't trigger. So now you have to factor that into the equation. Well, it's not just 1 point of damage every 2 turns now, right? Because now I have to factor in the off turn that I had, right? So how does that impact the equation of how much damage am I outputting from my weapon the entire game? The upside, of course, is that you're gonna have really explosive turns and fire the Hanabi Blaster afterwards. So I think the high roll potential is really hard on the weapon, but I don't think it's actually like better, in my opinion, than the pistol. I think people will be winning a lot because this list is actually very strong that we're looking at here. It's performing pretty well. I think that regardless if they're using it or not, I think the lists that are running the Hanabi Blaster are still going to perform just as well. I think that it's marginal enough that's probably not going to make or break your deck. I don't think that's really indicative of the weapon being like the correct choice, in my opinion. I think they're both fine. I'm just probably still going to be on the pistol, at least for this list that I'm making for myself. I'll probably be playing during the Pro Quest season. I think I'm still going to be on this weapon. Those are just my thoughts. Overall, probably like not very, it's probably not super impactful, right? Like we're just looking at slotting in like 2 cards, at least in my list, right? Just like 2 things. That's it. I also did Pulse Wave Harpoon. Probably not super shocking to anyone that's like been paying attention to a lot of the discourse around Dash like throughout the previous season. Like even leading up to it, I think most people came to a consensus that there were like 2 cards that were probably worth including, and the rest are probably just not going to be used very often. That's kind of it. I don't think there's anything else super notable, really worth talking about. It probably is just going to come down to those 2, and maybe the biggest point of contention is whether or not you do want to be on a Hanabi Blaster or not. I think there are some lists out there that maybe could use Hyperdriver and Hanabi Blaster, maybe use cards like Jumpstart that actually may have a lot more success with the card. I think if you're going to put Hanabi Blaster in like a typical Dash hybrid list, I think that's probably not the way you want to go. I think you probably want to go with a deck that can reliably play off of 3 card hands, which actually is pretty possible. Like we talked about those examples where you need like a 1 cost or a 2 cost in your hand, but the thing is if you have Tekla Foundry Heart and Hyperdriver, then you can actually put counters on it and still block with 1 card a turn if you really need to, which is really good. So Hyperdriver may be the way out of this problem, but we will see. So anyways, let me know what's been working for you. If you've made any adjustments to your Dash list, if you have been slotting in the new weapon, what you think about it. If there's anything else you think I missed, but until next time, thank you for watching.